A proper Victorian home had a front parlor, which was used to formally entertain guests, or for use on special occasions. Imagine what it was like to be a member of the Kelton family during the 1800s. Envision the crackling of the fireplace. To many, it was a simpler and more innocent time.
Welcome to the front parlor of the Kelton family's home. The family would have spent many, many hours in this room, formally entertaining, visiting with their friends. I'd especially like you to meet their son, Oscar. Oscar was 18 years old when the Civil War broke out, and he desperately wanted to serve his country. He begged his parents' permission to enlist. At first, they said no, they did not want to lose their oldest son. But finally, Fernando and Sophia did agree to sign the papers so that he could join. He was part of the 95th Ohio Volunteer Infantry. They fought principally in Tennessee and Mississippi, and in the beginning of the war, the company did not do well because they were not particularly well trained. As the war wore on, they received better training and went on to serve well. Unfortunately, Oscar died at the Battle of Bryce's Crossroads near Guntown, Mississippi in 1864. They buried his body in a shallow grave near a creek, but Fernando wanted to bury his son at Green Lawn Cemetery, so he went to Mississippi and retrieved his son's body and brought him back and buried him at Green Lawn. Unfortunately, on that trip, Fernando had an accident. He was thrown from the wagon and he suffered a concussion. He survived that event, but from that day on, he had dizzy spells. And one day, he went to the window of his office to get a breath of fresh air, and he fell out of the window. He died 3 days later. And so the Civil War actually took this family's father and son. The citizens of Columbus, the shopkeepers, they closed their doors that day to go to Fernando's funeral, which gives us some sense of how close the community felt to him.
Kelton family friend, whose grandparents worked at the Kelton House, James Lawrence.
My grandparents were married in this front east parlor, and we think married by the pastor of the church that my grandparents went to, Second Baptist Church, and the pastor being Reverend Poindexter, who happened to be a noted pastor in Columbus at that time. It was attended by the Kelton family, and it was a rather unique experience, of course, but went off well. My grandfather was a carpenter here at the Kelton House and performed quite a bit of carpentry work. He did the cornices of the windows of the parlor. He worked very much around the Kelton family, and apparently quite a help to them. There seemed to be a close relationship between the Kelton family, not only him, but the grandmother also.
I'd like you to look at the front window because I think you can tell a lot about the Kelton house by looking at that front window. To begin with, you see that the walls are very deep, and that's because the house itself gets its structure from brick. It is a brick house. It is not a wooden structure with brick facade. It's actually made up of brick that has been plastered and papered to see the walls that you see now. In addition, if you look at that window, you see the cornice boards above the window. Well, that was a bed that Mrs. Kelton got tired of. But in the 1800s, you didn't throw away a perfectly good piece of case-good furniture. They threw away nothing. They were the original recyclers. And so she had her handyman, Thomas Lawrence, turn it into cornice boards. And above this front window is the headboard. Over the side window is the footboard. And in the back of the parlor are the two side rails. If you continue to look at that window, you see the beautiful lace curtains. And as you continue your tour in the Kelton house, you're going to find that the Keltons very seldom did anything because it was pretty. It had to be practical, and lace curtains were extremely practical. You see, in the summertime, the only way to cool this house was to open the windows. And when you open the windows, remember that Town Street was just a dirt road, so the dust and dirt from Town Street were going to come into the house. Well, if you live in Central Ohio for very long, you're going to realize there are bugs throughout the summer, and those bugs were coming into the house. There were no window screens. Those had not been invented yet. So the best that anyone could do was to take a lace curtain, tie it in a knot, and that became the screen for the windows. So as you walk through the house, you'll notice that every single window has a lace curtain, not because they're pretty, but because they're practical. Now, even though they didn't have a gas furnace as we do in many of our houses, they still had gas in the house. They had gas lighting. And above you, you will see the original gasolier. It was turned on by using this instrument to turn each individual key. And then once the gas keys were turned on, they used the wick at the end of it to light each individual lamp. At the end of every day, they were very careful to turn off tightly each individual lamp, because if they did not, they would have gas running through the house at night while the family slept. And there were very sad stories of whole families suffocating because they were not careful with their gas lights. As you walk through the doors, if you look to your right, you will see perhaps the best piece of furniture in the house, and that is the Duncan 5 table. But I will tell you a secret of the Kelton House. One of the feet has been broken and repaired. Shh, don't tell anybody.
The back parlor was a commonly used part of the Kelton House, and back parlors were more frequently used by Victorian families than the more formal front parlor.
If you take a look at the center hall table where they would have gathered, you see evidences of the various things they would have done. The Kelton family Bible is there. The stereo optic viewer, which has the handle and the lenses and the place to put the photographs. The stereo optic viewer was one of the main entertainments of the time period. Families didn't travel nearly as much as they do today, so viewing pictures of the Sahara Desert or the Niagara Falls would have been a tremendous source of entertainment to the Victorians. We also see a cribbage board. Card games were very popular. This center of the back parlor was the soul of the Victorian home. In addition, correspondence would have been done at the desk in the corner, and letter writing was so significant to a population that didn't have what we have today, the methods of communication that are instantaneous. If you look at the sewing chest near the fireplace, you'll also see an array of knitting needles and other kinds of embroidery needles that would have been part and parcel of a woman's life in the 19th century. The oval portrait to the left of the secretary is Laura Brace Kelton, who married Edwin Kelton in Rochester. She moved to Columbus and raised her family here in the Kelton family home. To her left are her parents, Curtis and Charlotte Brace. And Curtis's parents are in the front parlor, Lester and Tama. On the wall next to the fireplace is Daniel Penfield, Grace Kelton's great-grandfather. He was a prominent New York City resident and moved to western New York State to become a land developer. His wife had no interest in leaving the life of Manhattan and said that she did not want to move to that mosquito-infested swamp of western New York. So he built her the most magnificent house he could, and she finally deigned to move to become the First Lady of Penfield, New York.
Well, I and my wife had tea with Grace Kelton, and it was quite an experience. It was a quiet session, although she would break it in with words about her family. The tea was very nice. It was rather sweet, but very good tea from what I could see, and altogether enjoyable experience having tea with her. And then as we were showed around through the house, she brought out a lot of points that my wife was quick to pick up on concerning ladies' things, and that wasn't privy to, I do remember that happening.